In designing the current task about you giving a persuasive oral, we've imagined a particular audience, which is other young people who are keen to create a better Australia. And we've called this context a conference, Learning Human. Obviously, the more human we can be, the better we'll treat each other. This idea links back to Frankenstein and Blade Runner, and the phrase is taken from a volume of poetry by Les Murray, in which he's making the same point. What we want you to do is to choose a contested issue, and if you look at the criteria, one of them says you need to be discerning in your creation of perspectives and discerning in your use of values, attitudes, beliefs, and cultural assumptions. This PowerPoint aims to be useful in terms of how you can use poetry and certain types of more thoughtful journalism to expose the values and beliefs and attitudes at stake, and also, of course, to use authorities to help you to do that. There are two kinds of media texts, and I'd be paying attention to both with respect to your chosen issue. The media texts within the 24-hour news cycle tend, of course, to play on the emotions that are churned up by issues, and they sell product by doing that. They, for instance, would be very keen to report what Mr. Donald Trump has said recently, and to look at places where emotions are running high. Perhaps more importantly, though, is to look at programs that are more considered and take a longer time to produce their conclusions. One such is Four Corners. You've seen a couple of episodes from this. The fact that a team have spent a long time gazing beneath the surface gives this kind of show more of a forensic value. Underlying a really good persuasive speech, I think, is a critique of a state of affairs at the moment. And that, of course, enables you to have a theory of change. If you can see what's wrong with something, you can then propose a change. So using a show like Four Corners helps you come up with a critique of an issue in society, and then you're in a better position to be able to offer a good argument. If you think of the example even that you've looked at today from Barack Obama, what he's doing, like great American speakers before him, like Martin Luther King, is actually analysing a situation that can be improved. He's analysing, of course, the polarisation in American politics between two parties who sometimes yell at each other rather than unite in a common cause. Another great show which has this experimental quality of looking under the surface is You Can't Ask That, in which a subgroup is asked questions anonymously sent. You may remember watching some of these last year. There's great episodes in which people like refugees feature and asylum seekers, and groups who might be seen as minorities are given a voice to speak to the sort of questions from the person on the street. I'd also urge that poetry could be used as authorities in your persuasive speech, because they can act in the same way. Poets tend to listen to the voice of the outsider. They tend to be against the person in power, wanting to puncture that voice. They can find some really clever ways of looking under the surface, and by that I mean being able to expose underlying values, attitudes, and beliefs which are at stake. Two such poets who I want to draw your attention to are Bruce Dorr and Les Murray. They're both Catholic poets. They both died within the previous year. They both have high status in our society, and they both have the courage, to quote Les Murray, to take the side of the wounded, the aberrant, in the original. In other words, people who are excluded but who have a lot to offer. And I think that could be a great strategy in considering your issue and perhaps in the arguments that you're putting together. Bruce Dorr says this, and it probably gives a wider purpose to the persuasive speech that you're putting together. Imagine your persuasive speech as one piece in a jigsaw puzzle across people of goodwill, young people of goodwill in Australia today, that we're trying to create that better place, that better country. We're put in this world to do good. Each of us, you could say, is a piece of the shattered mirror. In our lives and in our work, we still seek to reflect a fragment of that overarching sky. So your speech has a purpose. It's not just words. We're building a better Australia, and the speech can create action. Bruce Storr, I just want to focus on one theme within Bruce Storr's work as a kind of an example. I've been very interested in COVID-19 and the changes that it's wrought in society. One is, of course, as a run on Bunnings and the way in which we spend more time in the backyard pondering the meaning of things. There's a lovely quote from one of his poems called Homo Suburbiensis, in which we find a man alone in the evening in his patch of vegetables and all the things he takes down with him. So there's this image of maybe we are living in the suburbs and not the outback, but we yearn for an encounter with the wider natural world. This would be a lovely quote to link to issues of how we treat the environment, but also perhaps the way we sometimes diminish what human life is capable of. And in this time of reflection at the moment, we can see more deeply about the better society that we want to recreate when we come out of it the other side. Bruce Storr is also fantastic on the clashing influence of the media. And I think you'll probably get a better persuasive speech if you can go beyond those noisy voices who bombard us sometimes through our news feed. The quote in the middle there is lovely. Meanwhile, back at the place where the heart used to be, there is the kind of quiet that comes when the storm ceases and those ravaged creatures, the eyes, creep up from their blinking cellars. The idea here is that our eyes are almost assaulted by the blitz of violent news images. Some people have even used the idea of there's a kind of almost pornography of shocking images which news media assault us with. And Bruce Storr is arguing that there's a quieter, deeper self that can re-emerge when the storm ceases. Maybe that time is now. He is brilliant at understanding and describing our national obsession with sport, and COVID-19, of course, has caused a delay there, and he provides some insight into how much sport is part of our bloodstream. He describes here the first experience of going to a stadium, the pure flood of sound, when they are scarfed with light. A voice like the voice of God booms from the stands. Ooh, you bludger, and the covenant is sealed. There's an irony here, of course, sport should not be religion, but also an affection about this. Les Murray is the other poet I'm featuring here, and I think he's absolutely fantastic at understanding the voice of the outsider. In his poem Rock Music, he says that really everyone stays as a school kid for as long as they parade and reinforce the attitude of leaving some people outside the group. And he comes in strong and straight in saying why is it that people use these excluding behaviours, sometimes in Australia unwittingly, sometimes complacently, sometimes protesting that it's just banter, sometimes protesting that Australia should just be our place and newcomers and others should not be welcome. But the problem with that sort of approach is that we turn Australia into a place that once again is subhuman. Now, I'm not sure we find this kind of level of commentary in the papers all the time, and that's why going to a poet could be a little bit of gold dust in your persuasive oral, just giving you not just an authority to quote, but a way of looking that's a bit different and stands out. Another great poem by him is called An Absolutely Ordinary Rainbow, and just after Easter it's perhaps topical in that within it we see a Christ-like figure weeping in the central business district within Sydney. And of course the crowds stop and people feel amazed and shocked and feel a kind of a blessing of peace coming to them, but find it hard to approach as well. This weeping man who is kind of a prophecy for what society should care about but doesn't always care about. Other authorities to bounce off, there could be many. I can think of some really good sociologists like Hugh Mackay and Bernard Salt, but another great commentator on life is of course Pope Francis.